The Spot Track Podcast, talking sports contracts, the salary cap, and business of sports.
Welcome to another edition of the Spot Track Podcast. My name is Mike Ginnitti. It is Wednesday, July 19th. Getting this one in a little bit early. We've got Keith Smith in just a few minutes with an in-depth 5 things that he's learned from the NBA this offseason. He bounces all over the place. If you're an NBA fan, you're going to love it. He gets nerdy. He gets there's some draft recap. There's some summer league discussion, plenty of contract talk, and some discussion about how trades maybe have been devalued over the past couple of months here because of maybe some trades that broke some things. We've seen that before in other sports, and I think maybe he's on to something here in the NBA. So good 40-minute discussion with Keith on the back end of this show. I'd be remiss if I didn't start with the NFL. Plenty of news to talk about. I did most of the extension conversations over the past couple of episodes here. Training camps have officially started. The Jets players have started to report this morning, so we're in that mode. What that means, by the way, is any NFL draft pick who hasn't signed can't show up. So you're going to see a lot of reports about rookies signing their contracts finally. We still don't have the number one overall pick signed. Carolina is certainly going to make that happen in the next couple of hours here, in my opinion. And we'll see a flurry of that. A bunch of releases as well. You're going to see some things start to organize for cap purposes. And the 90-man roster down to 53 is ahead of us here. It's just a few weeks away as we get through camps and get through the preseason process. So we're there. I think we're 50 days officially from the start of the NFL season. So we'll be gung-ho in terms of all that content as much as possible. I posted an article referencing career earners at every position and players who are coming and which positions may be safe for a while in that regard. There's some names. There's some active players on there. There's some plenty of retired players on there. But look, it all comes back to, and it stemmed from this running back discussion. I'm not going to have it again here. I know a lot of outlets are still banging down that door, and that's fine. What we know about Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley, and for better or for worse, Tony Pollard, who has signed his franchise tag, is that there just simply wasn't an offer that was good enough to take. Sounds like Jacobs was super close. The reports out of Barkley's camp is it was about $2 million per year. You can say that that's child's play, and either side should have just said yes. They don't have to. Okay, nobody has to here. All right, Saquon Barkley is probably going to get a second franchise tag, and it's going to make him $22.5 million over the next 2 years. It's not enough. As you know, I've reported that he's probably a $25 to $27 million guarantee for that right now. But Miles Sanders, who is, 90% of what Saquon Barkley has been over the first 4 years here, got $13 million guaranteed on the open market with every team available to sign him. It's just where we are. Okay, so I'm not going to go too much further down this, but just know that saying no and walking away and getting yourself to the open market is probably not a better approach for this position right now. It's not. Okay, and if you're being offered a tag that's around the 10 million mark, you're one of the highest paid running backs in football. Okay, it's just a reality. So they're going to hold out. You're not going to see them around their teams for a while here. My guess is both of them show up for week 1. That's a guess. They don't have to. They're not going to get fined for any of it. They're going to start to forfeit money out of that $10 million, but they're not going to be fined because they are simply not under a contract right now. So it's a terrible situation. There's no right answer. I've thrown a couple of things on Twitter of maybe how we adjust things. However, the CBA is running through 2030. There's 7 more years before any of these discussions can actually happen. So we're just going to have to grin and bear it and hope that, some player, as I've said, comes out of the woodworks. Maybe it's Bijan. Maybe that player exists and he's going to break out this year. Maybe Jonathan Taylor turns around and has an expiring contract year that is worthy of Derrick Henry type money. It's possible. But until the perfect situation gets in front of us, we're not going to see that contract because these guys deserved it and didn't get it. So that's where we stand with that. I'll have full literature breakdowns on Quinnen Williams and Evan Engram's extensions shortly on SpotTrade.com. We just had another one hit today. Alex Highsmith with the Pittsburgh Steelers, 4 for 68, about $28 million guaranteed on that one. We'll do some work on that as well. That's not going to slow down. We're going to get the Burrow contract, the Herbert contract, and a few more here. Maybe a Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb combo at some point in time here. So it's going to be a busy July and August for NFL contracts as well as roster cuts and trades and things like that. So plenty of content to get to. And oh, by the way, we are 13 days from the Major League Baseball trade deadline. Cousin Dan is working feverishly on the draft signing bonuses that are pouring in. The deadline to do that is closing. So he'll be capsulating that, and we'll have a discussion about some of those. and also get back to some of these veteran players who are certainly going to be on the move as teams figure out what the heck they are for the rest of the season, buyers, sellers, or maybe even a little bit of both. Let's talk NBA offseason with Keith Smith. Fresh off his trip to Summer League, Keith Smith joins us to debrief a wild 2.5 weeks or so of NBA offseason. He's going to give us his top five things he's learned in 3 weeks of work here dealing with the NBA offseason. Keith, welcome. Fire away, man. It's your show.
Yeah, I took this in a little bit of a weird direction. Some of it's, general concepts. Some of it's going to be player specific stuff. But the first big thing, as I've kind of going through and we're running now, our kind of off-season recaps, which is openly, going to own a little dangerous with a Damian Lillard and James Harden potential trades floating out there, but those don't seem like they're coming in the next day or two. So we figured it's time. And one of the things that I've noticed going through all the deals that were signed, teams are taking back some control. Yeah. This offseason. They are not just handing out, you get a max and you get a max, like Oprah handing out new cars. Like it is, that they are in a spot where it is going to be, we're locking in a little bit here. Like a good example, Fred VanVleet, max deal with the Rockets, but those last couple years are, the Rockets took some control back on that. They've got a team option on that final year with VanVleet. They didn't just hand him everything, and that's even that to me speaks a lot to a team that's not very good going out and saying, hey, we want you here. We're happy to pay you the max, but we're not giving you the full 4 years, everything in your favor. Max deal, like we've seen in the past, kind of get handed out. It was, some level of control. We've seen that a lot with options, non-guarantee years, all that sort of stuff in a lot of these deals, which is an interesting kind of approach considering where everything is headed overall salary-wise in the NBA.
So are Phoenix then just zagging, right? Is that like the team that stands out like a sore thumb right now?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. The Suns, the whole intention with this CBA was everybody got kind of a grace period year where it was, all right, what we're going to do here is we're going to let everybody kind of get their stuff in order before all the full penalties come in and make it really hard on you teams that are super expensive. And we saw the Warriors do that. They traded out of a lot of long-term money to Jordan Poole for shorter-term money to Chris Paul. And the Warriors seemingly said, all right, yeah, it's time to get things in order. The Suns said, cool, one more year to get super expensive. Let's go. And they just went hog wild with the Bradley Beal acquisition and then getting all these other guys. And now all their other deals were minimum deals, but what they did, which was interesting, instead of doing 1 year minimum deals, which all come in just over $2 million for the veteran guys because the league subsidizes the rest of it, they did 2 year minimum deals with almost all of them by getting player options on that second year, which puts a lot of power to the players. But I think that was Phoenix owning, hey, we can literally offer you nothing more. Like the most we could do is a 2 year minimum deal and we'll give you the power on the other end. And all things considered, they did quite well filling out the roster that way.
Okay. So a little bit of temperament in terms of just throwing money out there. That sounds very, Major League Baseball-y right now. Maybe a bit of common sense coming to contracts here with the NBA. Is that how you're reading it?
Yeah, I think so. I think one other thing that's interesting too is we look at the extension negotiations that have been done. So the rookie scale extensions, we saw Anthony Edwards, LaMelo Ball, and Tyrese Halliburton, the three all-star level guys out of the rookie class, all get max deals, but none of them got a player option on the end. That the teams, basically said, hey, we're going to pay you a ton of money in a 5 year max deal, but we're going to hold you for 5 years and kind of control things. And then we saw Desmond Bane, who was the other guy, initially looked like he got a max deal, but they actually put incentives in his deal, which will allow him to get to the max number. But for now, he's held back a little bit from the other guys. So that was another measure of that. And then the other big kind of veteran extension that is still floating out here, we're recording this on July 19th, is Jaylen Brown and the Boston Celtics. There has generally been in the past, it's, okay, you're Supermax eligible. And it wasn't a complete fluke thing like out of nowhere. All right, here you go. Let's get you to the Supermax and go. We saw the Sacramento Kings with Domantas Sabonis do a rare, or at least somewhat rare, renegotiation and extension where they brought him up to the max number so then they could extend him off of that number. The Celtics are in a spot where they did not just hand Brown, all right, here's the full 5-year max with the player option, with the trade bonus and everything else under the sun. There seems to be some level of negotiation going on there, and that seems likely it's probably either money related, option related, something like that. So I definitely think we're in a world now where the teams are saying, all right, hey, we're going to commit, in some of these cases, $250 million to you in a contract, but we're not giving you everything. You're going to have to work with us somewhat on this.
Keith, what is the all be all deadline for Jaylen Brown in this extension?
Yeah, it's the beginning of the season for him to do kind of the Supermax type of deal here. Now, he could let that carry into next year, but the challenge is he may not be eligible to sign it as a Supermax deal because he made All-NBA this year. He'd have to make All-NBA again. Yeah. This coming season to be eligible. So at the beginning, or really the end of the offseason, right before the start of the regular season, that's when he's got to get that done.
And what about the trade scenarios? If he signs the extension, does that limit his trade? Does it restrict him at all? Is there like a yin and yang part of this offseason that has to happen here?
Yeah. So what happens is any player signs one of these designated player extensions, they're 1 year trade restricted. So he couldn't be traded at all for 1 year. And then after that, it comes into, it kind of comes back to the normal NBA game of, all right, I'm happy for a couple years and now I'm asking for a trade or something along those lines. If they trade him now, let's just say they were to trade him to, I don't know, the Orlando Magic. In the Orlando Magic, they could sign him to a standard veteran extension, but they cannot give him the designated player one, which that's the one everybody knows, right? That's the $250 million one. He can only get that from the Boston Celtics because you can only get that from the team that drafted you or a team that acquired you while you were on your rookie scale contract.
It's fascinating. Okay. Number two, what else have you learned this offseason thus far?
All right. This one, put me in the Captain Obvious category here, but Victor Wembanyama is going to be really good. And part of the reason, though, why I say that, he's just so even-keeled. He played that first Summer League game and was awful. I mean, really, really bad in that first Summer League game. And he kind of came out of it and was like, yeah, I thought I might be bad. I haven't really done anything basketball-wise since my season ended in France, and it's been, a whirlwind of go to the draft, get drafted, go to San Antonio. Talked about how he hadn't even had a practice with any of his teammates, and he was just kind of going on instinct. 2 days later, he was awesome. And you could see everything, this is what this guy can be. And it got super exciting to watch him kind of play and do his thing out there. It's weird, right? I've seen Yao Ming in person. I've seen Shaq in person. And it's not to say those guys aren't enormous, but Wembanyama, you could have told me he's 8 feet tall, and I would say, okay, because he's all arms and legs. Like, he's just so skinny. But he is, he's something. He's going to be a really, really special player. And that Spurs whole situation there with him and other young guys like Jeremy Sohan, Devin Vassell, Keldon Johnson, Malachi Branham. It's going to be really fun to watch them develop and build that up. They've got a ton of flexibility moving forward. My guess is next year's probably the year. If Wembanyama looks like he's as good as we think he's going to be, you're going to start to see them start to play in free agency, add some guys around him. And I think they're going to be pretty good pretty quickly.
I agree. That was going to be my follow-up is where do this Spurs team stand? I know they've made a small acquisition this past week. They've certainly ramped up the rookie scout players over the past couple of seasons. You think next offseason, 1 year from now maybe, is a time to push, or we'll have to wait and see?
Yeah, I think this year's going to be okay. We're going to play Wembanyama and all the kids and a handful of the veteran guys. Like they'll be in there. They'll be in the mix. Guys like Doug McDermott, Cameron Payne, Jetty Osman, Reggie Bullock. We'll see how that all plays out. But for the most part, I think it's going to be let's play Wembanyama and the kids and let's see how it all comes together. And now we could get into a spot where, let's say we're at the trade deadline. It's like, hey, we're kind of in the mix here. Sort of what the Utah Jazz were like a year ago. They could then turn around and say, all right, let's invest now. Let's go get some guys because they've got every contract on their books is, extremely tradable. They can move anybody with very little problem. But I really think what we're more likely to see is, all right, a year from now, we're going to go into the summer with probably somewhere in the range of, let's call it, 75-ish million in cap space, and let's see what we can do with that in a summer where it's probably not going to be blockbuster moves, but it'll be a targeted player or two that really we feel like can fit and lift Wembanyama. Let's go get those guys now. So we're probably a year out for them really making a ton of noise, but it's coming just because I think he's going to be that good, worth investing around him.
Is there any world where he's not the rookie of the year, Keith?
Yeah, I think so. Because I think, I think Chet Holmgren's going to make a real run at that. I think what's going to happen there is you're going to see how the voters weigh team success against individual numbers. Holmgren's numbers may not end up as good as Wembanyama's, but his team's probably going to be a lot better. I think the Thunder will make a real run at being a top 6 team and in the playoffs. And Holmgren looks like he's ready to go and looks really good. So I think that's going to be really fun. I think Scoot Henderson, pending what happens in Portland, he's going to make a real run at it. That dude he may be the most competitive guy I can remember coming in the last few classes. Like he's really ready to go. And you can almost sense he bristles at the whole, all right, cool, Wembanyama, great. Like we heard it, like watch what I can do kind of thing. So that's going to be fun. And I think with Wemby, his issue he may be a little inconsistent, especially out of the gate. I think it's going to take him a little bit to find his footing. His game's just a little bit different than some of the other guys. So I think it'll take some time, but eventually he's going to get there. And, so rookie of the year, maybe not, but he'll definitely be in the mix for sure.
And I think the greatest clue, not that it isn't obvious that he's going to be great, is a 5-year extension for Greg Popovich, right? Which absolutely did not need to happen. He could have walked away from this thing at any point in time over the past decade, and he is here for now the long haul, and that's probably because of what he has seen internally. There's no question about it, right?
Yeah, and he spoke last year when they asked him kind of how long are you going to keep doing this? And he's like, until I don't enjoy coming to the gym anymore, basically. And he was talking about how working with all the young kids, and this was pre-Wembanyama, it had re-energized him, and he was so excited to watch them. And he talked a lot about how when you're in that situation, you have to watch them develop incrementally, day over day, and just continue to improve and get better. And now you dump this generational talent. I'm sure he's like, yeah, this is great. Let's keep going, keep doing this. This is awesome. So that's that's good, and it's good for the game. That he's going to stick around and keep doing his thing.
No question. Number 3, Keith, keep it rolling.
All right, I'm going to stick with the draft. Very, not exactly breaking news here, but reaffirmed the draft for me. It's a very much an art or an inexact science. We saw a guy like Cam Whitmore, who was widely projected to be somewhere in the top 5 to 8 picks, fall all the way to 20 because of some health concerns. And he came out and dominated Summer League. Now, it's funny. I ran into a scout in Las Vegas just, when I was there last week. And one of the things he said to me was when we were talking was I said, what, just general thoughts about some guys. And he said, remember what I told you years ago? And this was, a decade ago when I first met him. And his quote was, Summer League doesn't tell you who can play, but sometimes it'll tell you who can't play. And one of the things that he was reinforcing was, let's not get crazy about Cam Whitmore. But let's kind of add it to our book as we start to evaluate. And he looked really, really good. I think there were a lot of concerns about the Thompson twins, Amon and Osar Thompson, as they came in. Amon only unfortunately played very briefly, but he looked really good, and then Osar looked terrific throughout. I think even if we go back to last year's draft class, Paulo Banchero didn't play because why would he? He doesn't need to. He was the rookie of the year. He's going to play with Team USA this summer. Excuse me. But Jabari Smith Jr. did get out there, and he was out there for it felt like all of 10 minutes, and it was like, all right, this is enough. Like he's too good for this already. Keegan Murray I'm not even sure if he actually played in Vegas or not. I did not catch a Kings game live, but he played at least in the California Classic, and same kind of thing. He was so good he didn't need to be out there. And then you had other guys who were going into their third and fourth year. James Wiseman was out there in his fourth year, former number 2 overall pick, and he just needs to still be out there playing and getting reps. So,
that was nice of you.
yeah. I mean, the reality is, I still kind of believe in James Wiseman just because I think with bigs, it takes so long. And his whole entry point into the NBA was such a screwed up mess where he barely played at Memphis because all the recruiting stuff and him being ineligible. And then with the Warriors, he stepped right into a team that was supposed to be good, but then wasn't good. Then he got hurt. So maybe he still comes along, but it just reaffirms everything with the draft of, man, like as much as we invest time and effort and everything that teams put into, scouting and getting to know these kids, it's still, there's still some level of a roll of the dice with a lot of these prospects that you're just hoping for the best.
One quick follow-up here on the draft. Where are you with these academy situations? We've got 3 of the top 5 picks coming out of G League, Overtime Elite, things like that. I don't think that's going away. Are those entities expanding, growing? Is the popularity still there? Do you think that name, image, likeness in college is going to keep some of those kind of players in the NCAA system? Where are you hearing, or what are your thoughts on that whole structure? As it seems like now there's a lot of ways to get to the NBA, and that might even expand with high school in a couple of years here.
Yeah, so we'll start with kind of a general thought of, I think it's great to have multiple paths. And because I don't think the traditional go to college, play in college and go direct to the NBA is right for everybody. I think for some guys that isn't the right path for them. We see sometimes guys go to college and it's like, well, this was a complete waste. This guy's way beyond this. He doesn't need this. This is, if anything, it's just a risk. And I was hating, we were starting to hear, this was probably, now probably 6, 7, 8 years ago, we're starting to hear about kids coming up when they couldn't come straight out of high school. We're starting to hear thoughts of they may just take a year off and just not wait until they're draft eligible and not actually play anywhere. And that's never good, right? I don't want to see it get to that point. So now with this, I think the G League Ignite does a really good, smart thing. And you can see with Scoot Henderson, he was there for 2 years because his first year that he played with the Ignite, he wasn't draft eligible because he wasn't old enough to enter the draft yet. So what happened was he spent 2 years with the Ignite, and you can just kind of see it with him physically when you watch him play. He gets into the lane against some of these guys because Summer League is made up of guys who are rostered players that are generally in their first year 1 to year 3. Every once in a while, like we talked about with Wiseman, you get a guys in year 4. Then the rest of the guys are guys who are generally 5 to 6 year veterans that are trying to find their way back to the NBA, right? They're trying to either show out and get a training camp invite or just stick on a roster, or quite frankly, a lot of them are prove to overseas teams, hey, I'm pretty good and I can play. So going back to Scoot, you see him go in there against a guy who's been a pro for 5, 6 years, and he doesn't bounce off those guys and go flying like a lot of the other rookies do. He's ready for the contact because he's been going through it for 2 years at the G League Ignite level. Overtime Elite's a little bit of a different story because it's, to some extent, and I'm very much generalizing here, but it's kind of like a glorified high school AAU type setup, where there's not a lot of they're not playing against older pros. They're playing against like aged guys, but it's not in the same kind of collegiate environment. Most of the games, there's very sparse attendance, if any, there. So you're not even getting that kind of experience there under the lights with pressure on and all these kind of things. So we're going to see the Thompson twins are going to be major guys. They're the first two high picks to come out of that program. So we're going to see what that looks like. But I think those are going to be there because it's also good too. These guys don't have to now go overseas if they don't want to go the college route. We'd seen a handful of players do that. Whether that be going way back, Brandon Jennings, or that's what LaMelo Ball ultimately did. Rather than go to college, they went overseas for a year to start getting paid and get that experience. Now guys can get that through a couple different ways here. And then college. I mean, I think it's the NIL stuff is great. Hey, if the schools are going to make millions off these kids, the kids ought to be able to make some money too. So I do think that will balance things out a little bit where you'll see some guys, go. It feels like it's feels like football was first and now basketball is starting to spill more into them getting those big deals. But, it's funny. I was reading a thing the other day. It was a player who's like, I'm making less on my NFL contract than I would have made, in an NIL deal in the first year just because of the way it worked out. So, which is just, I mean, that tells you, the booster money, coming in through these NIL deals, how crazy it is. But, hey, it's all business. So I don't mind these kids getting paid.
And just to put you on the spot here, and if you don't know, that's perfectly fine. What's the pay like in a G League Ignite structure or an overtime elite structure? Is it comparable to a nil situation for like a Scoot Henderson type player?
Yeah, overtime elite. I'm not sure because they base so much of their whole thing around like it is still school
development.
And there's still a classroom portion, but I do know those guys are getting paid on the G League Ignite. They're essentially getting the same as what a two-way player would get out of going to the G League Ignite, and then. Now, the cool thing when they set up G League Ignite was part of the whole process with this, and we're in year 5 or 6 maybe of the Ignite. They set it up so that they will cover school for those kids. So essentially, if you wash out, 5 years in, you can come back and then they're going to pay for you to go to school and go get a degree and, move on to whatever the next path in life is for you. So I think that's a, kind of, neat setup that they came up with there for those guys. But yeah, it's definitely, it's a pretty good living, but yeah, they're not necessarily making millions, which is where, if these guys start pulling down these, $1 million or more NIL deals from college, we may see that start to flip where it's like, I can do a year at Duke or Kentucky or wherever and, just kind of do my thing.
Yeah, I do think it'll balance out. I really do. I don't think any of it's going to go away. If anything, it'll amplify and balance out, and the money will just have to get better because that's what is deserved, quite frankly.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'll say this too, because I don't know that the whole one and done thing is going to change for the NBA anytime soon. I was told, then got it confirmed by parties on both sides that when they sat down and negotiate the new CBA. When it got to should we let kids come in right out of high school? Both sides kind of looked at each other and were like, dude, who wants this? We're good. Because on the NBA side, they don't want to necessarily tie up roster spots and all this stuff in drafting a kid right out of high school and saying, all right, well, it might be 2 years before this kid's ready, but now he's already halfway through his rookie contract. We've tied up the roster spot for 2 years and somebody who can't play. And not only that, but now we got to send all of our, scouts into these high school gyms all over the country. Cause the way it works is they're also paranoid. You get a call about some kid in, rural Vermont who's, tearing it up. And they say, you should check this kid out. He's pretty good. They're gonna go and do it because you don't want to be like, well, who else is there checking him out? If we don't go, someone else may go do it. And then on the Players Association side, every kid who comes into every year we introduce a minimum of, it's usually 60 guys through the draft. This year is only 58 because of a couple forfeited picks due to tampering. But when you introduce 60 guys, that's 60 vets that are out of jobs.
Right.
So in their mind, as they're looking at it, is why do we want to now introduce a whole bunch of 18-year-old kids that are coming in and they're bumping the 10-year veteran out of that last roster spot because the team's thought on process on it is, well, he can't really play. We're not going to play them anyway, so let's go with the kid in the upside and we develop over bringing in the vet at the back end of the roster. So that both sides, as far as I know, kind of looked at each other and are like, hey, low-hanging fruit, let's just cross this off the list and say no change. And that seems like where it's at. When that changes, the sense I have is if we get major draft reform change and G League reform. The Phoenix Suns owner just came out this week and said he will have a G League team, and that'll be now all 30 teams will have their own G League affiliate. And I think where this eventually will go is if you want to draft a kid out of high school, you can do it, but it's going to come with must spend a year in the G League or must spend some time in the G League. And what that'll also do, we'll have the added benefit of increasing the legitimacy of the G League. I think they eventually want to get it to be where it's kind of like baseball, where if you're a fan, you generally know who your top 2-3 prospects are in the minors for your team. They want it to kind of turn into something like that down the line.
I love it. I think it's time overdue on that one. So I think, by the way, I think the interest is there. I think a minor league program in some of these cities is gonna flourish like it did with baseball for a lot of years and still does in some places. So I think it's a welcome addition to the league. All right, number 4.
All right, this one it's kind of staying related to the draft. At the trade deadline, things got bananas with second-round picks getting traded. I know at one point Scott and I looked at each other, and I'm like, I don't know, all that work we've been doing on track and draft picks, just throw it all away because we got to start over. I don't know who owns what pick anymore because, some teams were trading 4 and 5 and 6 of them, and it got crazy. Then we saw the Bradley Beal trade happen where the Suns, they were out of first-rounders to trade because they'd sent them all to the Nets for Kevin Durant. So they were like, here, take every single second-rounder we have to give you except for the one we're going to keep for this year's draft. Now what we're seeing is you're starting to see teams pull back a little bit. And I think what you're starting to see is Phoenix, I think, realized, oh boy, because they literally were sitting at a point this offseason where they had control of none of their future draft picks. They were sitting on, nothing. They either were traded or swap rights had been given out on all of their future picks. And now we've seen them do 2 separate deals, one with the Grizzlies and one with the Magic, where they traded their last kind of little bit of swap rights that they could on future first rounders to bring in 2 and 3 second rounders. So I think you're seeing these teams that are a little draft pick poor go back out and say, we got to have something. If for no other reason, we want to have something in the coffer to trade down the line, but we also would like to be able to bring in some of that cheap back end talent for when we're so expensive. And then teams like Orlando and Memphis and Oklahoma City, they can give up multiple picks because they're sitting on young cores that are signed long term. They've got anywhere between 5 and 10 roster spots really kind of locked in for the next 3 seasons or so. So for them, we can give up some of these extra for just the shot in the dark that this first round swap ends up being something amazing down the line. So that is just we're seeing this revaluing of draft picks happen. We're also seeing in the Lillard trade discussions and the Harden trade discussions, the teams that are interested in them are basically saying, man, we don't know about giving you everything under the sun, like happened in the Gobert and Mitchell trades last summer. Because again, I think teams are like, yeah, we get those guys. We're going to be pretty expensive ourselves, and we have to have that pipeline still feeding in talent that's cost controlled and quite frankly much cheaper on our books to at least balance things out a little bit. So that's going to be something that's going to continue to take probably, I would say, the next 2-3 cycles samples to fully see how it plays out. And you're always going to have some team that's like, well, we're really close right now, and our whole goal is to win a title. Let's get this done. But it's been fun to kind of watch how teams go through this draft pick evaluation.
No question that the second round pick has become some sort of tool here, more powerful than it's ever been. I've got since that Beal trade, I've got Washington acquiring 9 second round picks this offseason.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
I've got, I think Detroit and Boston have 5 each. I mean, it has just become kind of a farming process. And I think you're right. If the overall trade stuff is going to be devalued, and I think it is, I don't think that's a myth, then aren't those going to become more powerful as assets? I think they will, especially if you package, 3 to 5 at one time. So I do think that's not the worst way to do business. Oklahoma City spent all this year trying to get first, and I think they're brilliant for doing so. But maybe you can simplify that process this way, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And the challenge with the first rounders too, those come with the guaranteed rookie scale deal attached to them. So if you're in a spot right now, Oklahoma City, like as we record this, their roster is at the offseason maximum of 21 players. That went up by 1 this offseason. It used to be 20. Now we're up to 21 because they added the additional third two-way spot. But the Thunder they have 20 players under contract that are signed to standard NBA deals. That can only be 15. Mm-hmm. So you're going to see them have to cut or trade 5 guys in trade, take nobody back in the trade, because that obviously doesn't help anything. So we're in a spot where as you look at this Thunder roster, and I'm not saying they've done anything wrong, because they used most of their cap space to eat deals and bring deals in exchange for future assets from these teams. But what you're looking at now as you kind of look at them is, we've hit the tipping point where they just have too many picks. Yeah. The roster has too many good young players who are under contract. It's kind of funny if you pull up their cap sheet on the multi-year view on Spot Track, they're one of the more full views, because every year has a salary attached in it. Now there's options in there because a lot of these guys are on rookie scale deals and other things, but they are pretty well full up. So we've seen kind of the tipping point where for them, sitting on I think, what did they say the other day? 35 picks in the next 7 drafts. That's insane. It's way too many. You're never going to get value. You could never possibly use all of those picks. You could cycle through your roster every year and not use all of them. So they're in a spot where teams kind of know, and they're like, yeah, you throwing in 4 picks, that doesn't really overwhelm us, because it's, what is it? But it's still a spot where it is, all right, but you're also willing to take this contract off our books, right, and do the picks okay, let's go. Well, we can make something happen. So they're in a really good spot. But all those teams with those seconds, they're in a spot now where you can move. And then the last thing I'll say on those second round picks, with the advent of the new second round pick exception, which we've kind of jokingly termed the Pelinka rule, because Rob Pelinka repeatedly blew signing his second rounders to deals longer than 2 years. That new second round pick exception makes that those picks are more valuable, because you're not having to carve room out of cap space or out of an exception to sign those guys for more than 2 years. You can just use the new second round pick exception to give them the longer contract. So we're in a pretty cool spot with second rounders being this new thing, rather than just, hey, we drafted some European guy that's probably never ever going to come over, and his draft rights will get traded 7 times as just the something in a trade that has to go. Now there's actually real value attached to those picks.
Okay. 5th and final one.
All right. So the 5th and final one, we are in a spot with the NBA where the league is in great shape, and it's in great shape in a lot of different ways. One, we know the revenue came in stronger off of last season than anybody expected. The CBA went off relatively smoothly. We no delay, no stoppage of even the off season, definitely no stoppage in games. Really great to see with that. The salary cap is going to continue to go up. I heard most people that the NBA projected the cap at $142 million for the next season, meaning the 24-25 season. That's moderate growth. That's like 7.5%, 8% growth. No, everybody's like, yeah, that's nonsense. It's going to be 10%. Like very few people think that. And then going forward from there, it's 10% growth off of every year off of that. So we're in a spot where, you have that coming in. The new media rights deal is coming in. But again, because they capped it at 10% growth per season, we're not going to get a $25 million cap spike, which throws everything out of balance for 1 year. And a whole bunch of guys who don't deserve massive contracts get them. We're not going to see that. They did a really nice job balancing that out. And then the last two things I'll say is because they're intertwined with the great money coming in, but also the league is as deep in talent right now as I can ever remember.
Me too.
You have really good long-term veterans. You have good kind of guys who are stepping forward to take over the mantle and kind of heading into their prime years. And then we've got this influx of young talent behind those guys that are coming in that are going to be absolute stars as we go. So those are, super exciting. All that ties into Adam Silver has all but admitted the NBA is going to expand. He, after years and years and years of saying it's just not something we're looking at right now, it's not something we're really interested in. He has openly said, as soon as the media rights deal is done, that's going to be the process we start. It's pretty much the worst kept secret that it sounds like Seattle and Las Vegas are going to get teams. What some are starting to wonder now is, are they going to be the first major professional sports league to go to 34? Are they going to jump into a couple places where, hey, let's get in early instead of being the third and fourth league in a city? Let's try to get in early on a couple cities, and we'll go to 34. And I think it'll probably be to 32. They'll do that. They'll probably move Memphis. It sounds like most likely will get shuffled off to the Eastern Conference, or they blow the whole thing up and relook at all of it together. But you've got the in-season cup coming. You've got all this stuff. The league is just in tremendous shape, which is really fun. And the expansion part, man, when that comes down, I can't wait because we're going to be content rich for a year on how we deal with expansion draft stuff. So that's going to be amazing.
Can I offer one like a 5A question back to you here, because sure. I feel like I haven't heard enough about this and I'm fascinated. Was there any scuttlebutt around the water cooler at Summer League about this in-season tournament? I know the details are out. I'm not totally sold, Keith. I especially on the timing of this thing. I thought it was going to be more in like the January area. It's not. They're like pumping this right into college football and NFL season. I'm not sure about this one, man.
Yeah, so there's a lot, more than a little. There's a lot of talk about it, and it's pretty divided. You've got some people who I think one of the quotes, and I put it in one of our Summer League notebooks, was "Stop trying to make us soccer. Like we're not soccer." That was one of the quotes I got from a team executive. But then there's others who are like, "Hey, we got to get interest in those games in November and December because the reality is far too many people look at it as, who cares, right? I'll see you at Christmas. That's when the NBA starts for me because football's wrapping up. Let's go. I think they were really smart to put those cup games, the group stage games, on Tuesdays and Fridays where there isn't a lot of football being played. So I think that was really smart of them. Evan Walsh, who's kind of the NBA's in-house guy, who was really I don't want to say in charge of this, but he was key in getting this done. He said on the Low Post the other day, it was Kyle Lowry who said, let's have specific days where it's this. And Kyle Lowry's point was that allows teams and players to gear up, saying, all right, hey, if I got to be fully ready to go for my game on Tuesday because it's this tournament thing plus a regular season game, let's go. Then I'll sit out Sunday if I need to, or whatever. I'll be ready to go on Tuesday. So that's going to be fun. It's going to take a little while for it to catch on, but the thing I kept going back to, and it's funny because I was talking with someone he's pretty grumpy about this stuff and he doesn't like this kind of change. And one of the things I said is, yeah, but you didn't like the play-in tournament either. And now and he's like, yeah, it's pretty great. He's like, it is pretty cool. So it's going to take a little while for them to figure it out and for teams to fully care and people to get invested. But I do think it'll come, over time, because it is something that it's a proven model, not just in soccer, but in European basketball. They do these domestic cups. When it'll really take off is if they do expand it eventually out of just the 30 NBA teams, they say, hey, you know what?
Yeah.
We're going to introduce the G League teams into this. Now, the challenge is going to be nobody's going to want to lose to a G League team. So that's going to be a little bit of a problem. We know it'll eventually happen, right? 16 is beating a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. It will happen at some point, and then that'll cause all heck to break loose. But yeah, it's going to take some tweaking and adjusting, and probably over a period of a few years. But for me, you can get things a little more interesting in those November, December games for people beyond the maniacs like me who are watching from day one of the season. Let's go. Let's kind of juice it if we can.
One question that I have, I don't know if you know the answer yet. Is it still going to be on the TNT ESPN broadcast?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe what they're going to do is they're going to make sure those. I think they're calling them in-season group nights or whatever, because it was a little weird that they're literally just calling it the in-season tournament, and then what they win is the NBA Cup. And we were all told stop calling the whole thing the NBA Cup, and we're like, why? Like that's way better.
I agree.
It's a better name, but whatever. That'll take. And I was told eventually Adam Silver would like to name it after David Stern. But why he doesn't want to is if it fails spectacularly, they don't want to be the one thing they put David Stern's name on to be like, well, that all fell apart in 1 year. Now we can't name the next thing after him. So that's something that's out there. But I think what you're going to see with this is it's going to take iterations. But yeah, it's going to be those main TV partners. And one of the things that they were talking about doing is doing some kind of like all right, this will be the game that you'll get, but a lot more of the whip around quad box kind of things where it's like, let's check in on what's going on. It sounds like, if you remember, they did the day before election night. They did that new where they staggered every game by 15 minutes. I think you're going to see some of that on these nights. I think that was a tryout for, hey, what would that look like if we start some, even if we have to start games at, as early as, 6:30 or something Eastern, let's do some of this. So they're going to play around and use this to experiment. And it's like I said, it's going to take a couple years, but you're going to get a lot of stuff. And I think some of the things they're stealing from both the NFL and the Premier League on this, where it is, hey, let's show you multiple things at once, because I think they realize that's how a lot of fans are viewing it anyway, right? Not as many people are sitting down, turning on the game, and then they sit for 2.5 hours and watch. It's, I'm on my phone, I've got my laptop on, I'm checking in on another game for, whether it's fantasy purposes, gambling purposes, or just, I'm a huge fan and I want to, consume as much. I think they're going to lean heavily into that, which will be a lot of fun.
So the only reason I ask about the broadcast is, well, I like the NBA broadcast partners, but also big soccer fan. I know you are too. Yeah. When my team is off because of the FA Cup or one of the derbies, I have to scrounge to find out where to watch this thing. I don't know which streaming service the FA Cup has and the Champions League, and it's a real pain in the what, Keith, and it's driving me bonkers throughout the year. So as long as I can still turn on to TNT, whether it's a tournament night, whether it's a regular season night, I think that'll be okay. But the second they start farming this thing off to a streaming service, and it's coming, that's going to be a problem, because I'm telling you, it's a problem for the soccer tournaments.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, I go looking for my team, and I'm like, all right, what are we on? And then invariably it comes into either something I don't have, or it's like not even available here. And then it's like, all right, I'm not going to turn to one of those shady streams that's probably loading 100 viruses into my computer. So you know what? I guess I'm just going to. What kind of
fan are you, Keith?
yeah, right. Bad one apparently. But yeah, you get into those spots where it's I want to be very careful. But yeah, they will be available to see one way or another. I know the rest will be on League Pass, definitely for sure. That's, going to be something that comes. We're seeing the Phoenix Suns are moving their games to free over the air TV next year. That's all now moving forward. So that's going to be an interesting thing to track and watch. So yeah, all this stuff's going to take, a lot of evolution here over the next year plus as they negotiate the new media rights. And that'll be all part of, whatever this new NBA is that comes, over the next, let's say 5-6 years.
It's good stuff as always. There is a ton of literature on SpotTrack.com from Keith. You mentioned your summer notebooks. I know that's something you've been doing quite a while. We are thrilled that you brought it over to SpotTrack with you. It's a 3-part series, right?
Yep, 3 parts. Yeah, we did a general one, an East and a West, and then so that those are all up, and we've got our first. We're going division by division with kind of off season recaps, just so everybody. I can't tell you how many people again like I forgot that guy signed there or got traded there. So our idea is you pull it up, you look, and you can see right there, and then we answer a couple questions. Well, what did they do? What do they still have to do? Before the season starts and those kind of things. And yeah, we're having a lot of fun with those. The rest of those will be up by the end of the week before I go on my little vacation here.
Enjoy it. We'll touch base soon, Keith. Thanks.
Thank you.
Always great catching up with Keith. As I mentioned, there are literally dozens of articles from this offseason from Keith, either recapping a trade, breaking down a division, which more of that is coming in terms of recap, as he mentioned, or just general thoughts. He was in attendance for Summer League, bumping elbows with all the right people, and he brought back plenty of notes that he put into article form on SpotTrack.com. For Scott Allen, my name is Mike Ginnitti. Thanks for listening to this edition of the SpotTrack Podcast.